Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 1395, The Hideous Doctor. Chapter 1395, The Hideous Doctor. It took Northern's hard voice to jack the owl doctor back into the room and what was happening in front of him. Hey! He flinched and staggered back. Commander General, AR, are you? Do not worry about me. I need you to open him up and put all these organs into him. Tell me whatever you need, and I will give it to you. Northern's gaze hardened. He must not die in your hands. If he does, you'd wish he hadn't. Herveth swallowed. His large round eyes flickered, darting between Northern's face and the carnage behind him. But then his gaze straightened and he placed his clawed hands on his chest. I pledge to you, once I lay my hands on someone, they never die. He turned back to the table, sweeping his gaze across the organs scattered around the raised platform where the hairy beast's body lay, barely clinging to life. All this to save a beast? Hervetha's brow twitched. He had watched Northern across enough encounters now to form an impression, and the impression had been consistent. A man who had climbed so far past ordinary feeling that emotion simply could not reach him anymore. Herveth had lived a life surrounded by such people. In his experience, every being that touched true power eventually cut those strings. The heart became dead weight, and they discarded it like old flesh. But here Northern stood, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides, watching a dying beast the way a man watches a dying friend. Herveth had been wrong about him. He raised his hand and his claws sprang out with a silvery glow. Then he fixed a sharp gaze on Northern. Don't worry, Commander General. I will take this opportunity to show you my true worth. I need all the organs here, nothing more. What I need right now is for you to step back. I will be performing something of a miracle, and I'd rather not get distracted. Northern hesitated. His eyes lingered on Mr. Fluffy, on the shallow rise and fall of the beast's matted chest, and something flickered across his face that he buried before it could take shape. But he stepped back and allowed the owl doctor his space. Hervetha's feathers spread, and what looked like wings fanned out from his body. They weren't wings. This was a grotesque amalgamation of hands. The feathers covering his body had always served one purpose: to hide the hideous limbs Herveth had sewn into his own form. An ugly thing beneath the plumage. 3 hands on each side, arranged in a skeletal fan, curving through sinew and surgical thread. Herveth used his primary claws to tear into these secondary hands, and instruments began emerging from within them. Scalpels, clamps, thin tubing. As he drew the instruments free, another hand was already steadying Mr. Fluffy's body. Another gripped a scalpel and prepared to cut. At the same time, a lower arm produced a thin pipe and mask connected to anesthetic fluid, pressing it over the beast's muzzle in one clean motion. The man was single-handedly performing what a whole team of surgeons would need to do. And he was doing it with flawless speed, his focus undivided. His eyes never left the patient. Every other part of his body moved like an automaton that already knew its task before being told. Northern watched from behind, oblivious to his own healing limbs and the chunks of ruined flesh across his body that were already knitting themselves closed. Minutes bled into hours. Herveth stood in the same position, his extended limbs sweeping through the air around the table, all operating on the beast, taking the organs one careful beat after the other and fitting them into place with surgical thread and essence. At some point, Northern almost opened his mouth to ask if the man needed a hand. But he watched Hervetha's back, the absolute stillness of his concentration, and swallowed the offer. This was the doctor's craft. Northern understood what it meant to be in the middle of something that required every fragment of your attention. He would want to be left alone. So he gave Herveth the same. Several more hours passed. Northern stood. The owl doctor stood. Neither showed signs of stopping. The organs on the platform were disappearing one by one, and the surgery was progressing smoothly. The day star transitioned into multiple dark stars, and still Herveth operated on Mr. Fluffy. In the meantime, Northern pulled away all his need for essence expenditure and stood there, leaving his entire base defenseless. Or so one would think. At the edges of the dark forest, 3 people cut through the undergrowth. One was a dark-haired man with a weathered face and rags for clothes. Leading them was a pristine young man with jade skin and brown hair, blue eyes bright above a suit of silver armor. The last was a young lady with short black hair and black eyes, a fierce set to her jaw as they marched forward. Several monsters leapt into their path, but the lady was already moving. She surged from behind the other two and lunged forward, drawing her sword and cutting them down with barely any applied effort. Her sword pattern was flawless, each stroke flowing into the next with a polish that made it look effortless. The barbarian watched and smiled. The clear-tide path of the wager house is as glamorous to look upon as their structures. Adelaide, the fine young man in silver armor walking beside him, responded without looking at him. His tone dripped with loathing. What do you know about glamour? All you know is despicable dirt. The barbarian sucked air through his teeth, a low, threatening hiss. Adelaide didn't flinch. He stopped walking and turned to face the barbarian with open indignation. I could kill you right here and report to your master that you made a careless decision while fighting the target and lost your life for it. The barbarian's expression didn't change. You praise yourself too much, all because the sixth prince recommended you. You're assuming you can defeat me and that you will walk out of this alive. The barbarian chuckled. There was a lazy light in his eyes that made Adelaide's jaw tighten, something unbothered and measuring that sat behind the amusement like a blade resting in its sheath. He shrugged. I will finish this easily. Perhaps teach you the meaning of strength through it. His voice dropped the humor. Barbarian this, barbarian that. You lot can shut your mouths and give us the respect we deserve. Adelaide raised his head and scoffed. Respect you deserve? After the ungratefulness shown by your tribe after the Giran Duchy took in your kinds. How is 300 years of history my fault? Adelaide fixed him with a disgusted glare. It'll forever be a blemish that you and your kinds will carry. You're not even deserving to be called humans. Animals, all of you. Animals. The barbarian opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. His body shifted, weight dropping low. The lady caught it at the same time. Her sword was already half drawn, her stance changing as she faced a particular tree where a young man with ivory skin crouched on a branch, watching them. His eyes glinted with empty light. His long pointed ears flickered, as if responding to the soft breeze. Chapter 1396 Elan, the Speed Absolute. Chapter 1396 Elan, the Speed Absolute. During the past few days after Northern decided to summon Kalatel, the forge had been completed, and with it came the ambition he'd been nursing since the plane's formation. He wanted to turn his soul forge into a proper domain of destruction that was simultaneously one of absolute peace. Hell and heaven bred in the same plane, and that plane was going to be his soul. After the forge, the next project was the Frozen Garrison. He had named it that because it was going to sit in the heart of the glacial mountain, a region of utter cold. Not that the cold mattered to his echoes. They were unaffected by severe weather conditions, just as he was. The reason he'd chosen the glacial mountain was simple. It was far bigger than the volcano and connected directly to the dark plains, that expansive, seemingly endless extension of dark stone and gray skies. This was also the gate where he had first called upon Byran. The Red Mountain already had its purpose. The volcanic mountain, which he decided to rename Heartland, was going to serve as the center of the plain, with the glacial mountain extending to its north. On the southern edges, the terrain transitioned into the dark plains. In between the Heartland and the Red Mountain sat a lake that contained the outrageous flood raven, had once used to destroy an entire city. Northern at first did not know what to do with that water, so he dug around the Heartland, allowing the water to define it as the center by separating it into an island of its own. More echoes were still working to dig deeper and wider, giving the water the leeway to spread and multiply. As for the garrison, Northern began to invest strength in some of the echoes. Recursive generation created several evolution paths for the variants of every echo that infinite iteration produced. But what Northern could also do was use advanced fusion to fuse two echo variants together. At level 1, he was limited to 2 at a time. He decided to fuse all the variants of Kalatel that had been formed so far into one single entity, in order to appoint him the commander of the humanoid forces among the echoes. The elves he slaughtered in Arcadia, the humans he killed in the Dark Continent, the White Walkers he cut through. All of them were being commanded by Kalatel, who wasn't so much Kalatel anymore and had become an enigmatic element of speed instead. Elan, the Speed Absolute. Echoes worked in a different way than humans did. They couldn't retain their abilities and talents because they were merely echoes of what once was. But Endless, of course, broke that boundary by giving them the capability to evolve. Northern's ability to study the form of something before killing it also helped in that regard, because even though they became mere echoes, his inherent understanding of their true form imparted their mechanization and filled them. This could not be said for most of the creatures that were slain before Northern became a demon. For those, Endless caused them to continuously evolve until that initial spark was now a mighty flame. And it was further amplified when Northern fused them all together. This is what he had decided to achieve with Kalatel. making him Elon, the speed absolute. It wasn't a far cry to say that the echo had become a sovereign of speed itself. That same creature now crouched upon a tree, staring down at the people who dared to slaughter monsters within its area of jurisdiction. Elon had been assigned an important mission of watching over some riffraff after all. They stopped and looked up at the tree, tense with caution. Oh I. It looks like Colic wasn't lying after all. The barbarian stared upward with a pale expression, his eyes barely containing the horror and despair he was feeling from gazing at that being. If this was the creature that attacked Colic, the man had not been lying. He was not under any mind hex. He had been saying the truth as it was. The barbarian tried to move his hand to his sword, but his fingers were shaking. As a man who had built his entire battle prowess on instincts, every primal fiber in his body was telling him not to even dare. But it was different for Adelaide and the young lady beside him. They had unsheathed their swords. But that was it. The creature was standing before them. The barbarian had no idea when it had moved, even though his eyes had been on it the entire time. It was simply too fast for him to catch. Not just that, both Adelaide and the lady were standing, headless, and he didn't even know when this had happened. Blood sprayed from their necks as if something had slapped their heads clean off with a force that surpassed that of heavenly storms. And here he was, standing before that thing that may have very well been the one responsible. His body trembled and his legs weakened, driving him to the ground. The creature looked at him with a gray, empty gaze. Its gray hair flowed back instead of spiking upward now. It didn't wear much for armor, just a light black leather breastplate that was sleeveless, revealing lean muscles and ivory skin. If there was anything remarkable about a barbarian, it was their survival instincts. Oh dear, great one. Please look away from this one's foolishness, and grant me mercy. I will serve you with all my life and make sure you never regret making me your servant. Please, great one, spare my life. Elon stared down at the man, tilting his head left and right with no words, as if wondering what to do. Then, at the same time, he seemed to get an idea. He grabbed the barbarian by the collar and pulled him deeper into the forest. Chapter 1397 Medical Complications. Chapter 1397 Medical Complications. After over 30 hours of intense and careful surgery, Hervith finally sewed Mr. Fluffyback closed and administered post-operative medications. These were not the kinds that would have been administered in a standard hospital. They were merely the necessities. At the same time, Northern used Braham's talent ability again on the beast. This time it worked easily because he was only using the power's nature to patch what Hervith had already sewn. The owl doctor had done the most critical work and had done it to the very letter. Hervith staggered back as his horrible limbs folded into his body and a coat of feathers fell over it, giving him the monstrous owl body he always had. He leaned against the wall, tired, every bone in his body aching. But he still watched as Northern stood with the wolf and healed it with his abilities. Northern could feel the doctor's gaze on his back. Carried a weight that hadn't been there before. 30 hours. Northern had stood through the entire operation without making the simplest of sounds that could have distracted Hervith during the surgery. He had noticed, in the early hours, how Hervith's feathered head kept twitching in his direction, the beak parting slightly as though words were forming and then dying. The owl doctor had wanted to ask him to leave. Northern could tell. But Hervith was too fearful to say it and had only told him, with visible hesitation, to step back. And then braced himself for interruption. It never came. Northern simply watched, still as furniture, and let the doctor work. For stretches of time, he saw Hervith's awareness of him dissolve entirely, the doctor's gruesome limbs moving with fluid, almost beautiful precision across Mr. Fluffy's open body. It was only when Hervith turned to grab another instrument that his posture would stiffen, suddenly remembering he wasn't alone. And as Hervith had said it would be, the surgery was a very successful one. However, there were a few details that couldn't help but bother Hervith. Northern could see them sitting behind the doctor's eyes like stones he hadn't yet decided to throw. When he saw that Northern was done healing the wolf, Hervith leaned away from the wall. Northern offered him a warm smile. Thank you a lot. Name anything you want. I'll try my best to get it for you. Northern meant those words. Even if Hervith had said the heavens, Northern felt himself in a state where he could hurriedly start preparations to pull them down. Hervith thought for a bit, opening his mouth slightly. This is a very generous offer. It would be stupid of me to hastily make that decision. May I have a few days to think about it? Maybe share this thought with my friend. Northern looked at him and smiled a little. Well, the offer won't be sitting for long. Hervith allowed a short laugh, and then fixed Northern with a serious look. Is something wrong? Northern's expression turned grim. There's no complication or anything like that? Hervith shook his head. Absolutely not, nothing like that. I want to point out some of my observations while I was inside your friend there. Northern followed Hervatha's gaze, which went to Mr. Fluffy for a moment and came back. What about him? He has a very unique arrangement of organs. It took me this long because I had to figure all of that out first. Hervath paused, his owl head tilting slightly to one side, as though choosing his next words with surgical precision. There's something about him so synonymous to the shadow of the gods. Northern frowned. What do you mean? Hervath lingered. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate. I guess I'm saying, your friend, that wolf, may very well not belong to this world. And the organs you donated, they do work and all, but I fear they might have rewritten its existential trait. He shifted his weight against the wall, his taloned feet scraping the floor. While I combed through the insides, I believe its very existence was meant to be incomplete. As to what that means, I don't know. However, with the organs you gave it operating on it, with each endeavor of mine, it was like pushing its limits and capacity towards completion. Hervatha's voice dropped. As a result of that, you will begin to see certain traits. Whether this strange thing will cause your friend to be weaker or stronger, I really don't know. In fact, I can't fully process it. His gaze drifted to Mr. Fluffy, and something flickered there, something instinctive and old. And to be honest with you, since it's smelling like a dead god, I don't want to sniff my nose around it enough to know. There are consequences one such as myself cannot avoid. So I'd rather tell you all of this and forget I ever saw anything. Northern inhaled it all, and then fixed Hervath with a knowing stare. But you can't truly forget now, can you? You've seen it already. Hervath chuckled at Northern. I'm going to have selective amnesia. I know just what to do to forget I ever saw it. There are parts in our brain responsible for memories. I'll take. He belatedly caught himself and coughed. Ahem. I'm simply saying, yes I can. Northern would be lying if he said he wasn't a little surprised. The owl doctor really went and fortified himself into the greatest weapon of medicine possible. Not simply embodying all the variances of sickness and healing, but being able to perpetrate them on himself. It made him monstrous and hideous to look upon, but Hervath Klein seemed to consider himself beautiful. How fitting! Northern nodded. All right, I'll watch out for these things. You may go and think about that offer. As he said this, Hervath bowed and extended himself out of the room. Northern was left alone with Mr. Fluffy, turning over what Hervath had said. Since he took a portion of infinite iteration and placed it inside Mr. Fluffy, it was possible that his origin ability kicked in and began to sprout endlessness, which in an incomplete being would first have to make it complete. An existence meant to be incomplete, now being forced towards completion. Northern glanced down at the beast. Mr. Fluffy was still unconscious, but certainly breathing better now. It had survived thanks to Hervath. Now Northern's eyes hardened. The next time he and Ruffsburg met, Ruffsburg wouldn't be as lucky to have someone like Hervath Klein nurse him back to health. Chapter 1398, The Long-Awaited Reunion. Chapter 1398, The Long-Awaited Reunion. The Red Mine was more than an ordinary location to Northern. In fact, he held some sentimental value to it, and Northern always believed he wasn't a sentimental person. But whenever he came to the Red Mine, he couldn't help looking around and remembering just how gruesome this place had been for him when he had no idea what this life was all about and underestimated everything the world had been preparing in stock for him. The crimson glow of the crystals hadn't changed. That same bloodied light that used to make him feel like the mountain itself was watching, waiting for him to collapse. Northern had a love-hate relationship with the Red Mine. Inasmuch as it reminded him of those days of suffering and how hard he actually needed to try to survive, it also reminded him of how much he fell short of expectations and how truly deluded he was despite being an adult. He had deluded himself so much just to believe he never existed before and didn't have a life where he was cheated like a child, only to come to this one and let history repeat itself, that too with someone so young and inexperienced. Pathetic little me. But then, he was here again with that said person. Absolutely no animosity towards her, and about to show her the reason why she had had to suffer so much for a long time. I think I am a magnificently forgiving person. Look at me. I'm so proud of myself. Northern suppressed a grin while Raven's cool and calm voice made its debut since they came to his soul plane. So this is what a soul plane looks like. Northern frowned slightly. Come to think of it, I have never inquired. I guess I just always thought that everyone has a soul plane. Wait, yes, of course they do. Northern was sure of this because a soul plane was one of the major factors that made it possible to become a luminary. The manifestation of luminaries was Soul World, and that didn't just spawn out of the blue. Raven, however, shook her head. I do not have one. Northern was so shocked he stopped walking and looked at her. What? I guess it's a flaw that comes with the nature of my talents. I have 2 talents, both of which are EX ranks. When I became a drifter, I had to watch something inside me be destroyed, because the nature of my talents were 2 opposites that could never coexist. She looked down slightly. Truth be said, I'm very scared of using my darkness talent and only use it to augment my sword styles. It's very terrifying and disadvantageous to someone who is a pillar of hope. Northern placed his hand on his chin, rubbing it gently, a fondly curious light in his eyes. Two EX rank talents that are fundamentally opposed. And one of them ate the other's foundation just to exist. He let the implications settle. Now, this certainly is interesting. It will be very much harder to become a luminary than you thought. He reconsidered and added, no, actually, I think it may be impossible for you to ever become a luminary. Raven's brows knitted together and a grim darkness shadowed her face. What do you mean? Northern, as much as he wanted to impart in her the knowledge of becoming a luminary that his teacher had passed to him, felt reluctant to. Simply because the knowledge was too costly. Rizel died to discover that knowledge. And Ruffsberg had to venture into years of slaughtering monsters because he had no idea about it. Of course, at some point on the path to becoming a luminary, he would have confronted that reality and then realized how much easier it would have been if he knew all of this. The sad thing now was that Northern most likely didn't need this knowledge to ascend. He needed it to master his abilities as a luminary, certainly. But the system Aoi would do the rest. Which makes it all the more valuable to someone who doesn't have what I have. Now, to every other person whom the knowledge would benefit, he was very reluctant to give. It came to him at a great cost, so he wasn't just going to let it go. In order to tell you what I mean, I have to give you knowledge that cost me a man's life to have. I don't intend for you to have it for free. For one, we don't even have that kind of relationship. Let's be honest with ourselves. Raven replied in a straight tone. What do you want? Northern smiled. Now is not the time. Now, you have a family reunion ahead of you. Raven's expression shifted to confusion as he said that. But before she could say anything, Northern continued walking and she had to follow. The mines of the mountain had changed from what Northern remembered. Before, there were sections, and each prisoner was confined to one and made to harvest the red crystals, which Northern had now renamed Rethium and was slowly circulating on the market thanks to How. Northern had destroyed those partition barricades and instead made the entire mine above the mountains a vast expanse of seemingly endless Rethium deposits. It looked like multiple crimson corals were growing across the mountain with no single tree in sight. Plus, there was another mine inside the mountain. That was the one Northern and Raven were heading towards. They entered a cavern expanse where crimson stalactites poured light that flooded the space in deep red. The narrow passage opened into a wider chamber beyond the Rethium mines that hung at almost every corner and angle, even odd ones, like the mountain's insides had crystallized into something alive. The expanse they stopped at was a flood of the crystals. Here in the caves, there were even larger formations, the kind that no matter how many times one's axe swung, they didn't leave a scratch. Instead, the crystal retaliated, sending a wave of bloodlust that severely wounded the miner across their body. Even for a paragon like the patriarch of the Kageyama clan, these crystals were not easy to handle. The man was propped against an outcropped stone, his dark hair fallen over his face. His upper body was bare and made ugly by a myriad of red scars that covered it. He was not the only one in the expanse. There was another, much more fierce and larger man, but his back was turned towards the entrance, so all that could be seen of him was his broad back and short white hair. As Northern and Raven entered the expanse, the patriarch of the Kageyama clan spread his lips, his darkened and bloody teeth showing. My perfection. Have you come to pay your respects to me? Raven froze as she saw who it was. Her eyes trembled and she turned to Northern with pure indignation. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.